airbrush is a must. Actually not, because to paint the gunpla, you can brush it. You can also spray it. But according to my more than 5 years of experience using airbrush, even though it's heavy at the initial cost to buy a set of equipment, in the long run, the airbrush is cheaper than the spray can and finish faster than the brush method. And for sure, the airbrush produces the best result. So this is our material for today. Don't skip it because you need all of this to become a true airbrush artist with us, Alice Kingdom. Hello, this is me, Mr. Alice. I've been doing Gunpla since 2011 and I will share all about Gunpla with you. The standard equipment for the airbrush is a paintbrush, a hose, and a compressor. In short, the paintbrush is where you put the paint. The compressor is a tool for generating air pressure, and the hose is the medium that delivers compressed air to the paintbrush so that the paint can come out. You can use almost any type of paint from acrylic, which is the water-based, lacquer, which is the solvent-based, and enamel, which is the oil-based. Even some paint brands have some prepared so that they can be used directly on the airbrush without having to be diluted. Please just read the instruction on the packaging. But what is the meaning of this instruction? Sorry Japan, I can't read this. I prefer to use the lacquer type because it gives the best result and a stronger bond to the plastic. Some brands even issue their own thinner, although it really doesn't matter if you use a different brand as long as it has the same base. Remember to always the type of thinner according to the base paint material. Can you mix your own color? That is one of the advantages of using airbrush over a spray can. Just learn the color blending basic and you can produce unlimited colors according to your imagination. There are two types of paintbrush. The one I have is the dual action type. So when I press the trigger, it will produce only a spray of air. And from this position, when I pull the trigger, this is what regulates the amount of paint that comes out. The more the trigger is pulled back, the more paint will come out. In a single action trigger, you only have one function where when you press the trigger, the air and paint will come out simultaneously and the amount of paint that comes out cannot be adjusted by the trigger. So in dual action paintbrush, if you pull the trigger a little, you will produce a small spray, and if the trigger is pulled further, the spray will be wider. The spray shape of the airbrush is conical, so that if you spray from a short distance, it will produce a small spray. And if you are far away, the result of the spray will also be wider. But don't forget one thing. Airbrush don't just spray paint, they also spray air. You can see that at the tip of the nozzle there are two holes. The center hole with the needle is where the paint comes out, and the bigger hole around it is where the compressed air comes out. So when spraying, avoid too much pulling the trigger at a very close distance because a large amount of paint can be affected by the compressed air that comes out. Also avoid spraying too far because the paint that comes out will dry when it reaches the surface of the part. This will result in rough paint and weak bond between the paint and the surface of the part. So practice finding the trigger pull at the right distance. Remember, practice. The ratio of paint and thinner is the most important thing in using an airbrush. Many ask, what is the ideal ratio? I can answer that there is no ideal ratio. The ratio depends on how much pressure the compressor is generated. The greater the pressure, the thicker the pane needed, as well as if the pressure is small, a thinner pane is needed. The problem is that not all compressors have a pressure regulator or a pressure meter, like my compressor. So how do I know the air pressure that is being generated? That is why I say there is no ideal ratio. But don't worry, because I will teach you the philosophy of finding the right ratio and can be used at various air pressure. First, prepare the pane, thinner, empty container and marker. Pour the pane to be diluted into the empty container. For the safe ratio, use 1 to 1 with thinner, because usually at this ratio, the pane can come out of the nozzle even though it's still thick. Now try using that pane on your paintbrush. A sign of thick pane is that the pane cannot come out at the minimum trigger pull, and once it comes out, it will spray in large quantities. The result particles are also uneven, some are big spots and some are small. If this happens, dilute the pane you made earlier, for example into a ratio of 1 or 2, or you can dilute it directly in your paintbrush cup. Pour in the thinner, close the nozzle and pull the trigger so that the paint evenly mix. The important thing is you remember the ratio between paint and thinner. Every new ratio, try again until you find the moment when the paint can come out with just a little pull on the trigger, and the resulting particles are even. This way you can find the right ratio regardless of the air pressure of your compressor. Now move on how to paint with nail brush. To produce a strong bond between paint and plastic, a primer or surfacer, the main paint as a color giver, and a top coat are needed. Don't get me wrong with this spray can here. I only use the paint inside, which I will use on the airbrush. I don't use it directly. I will teach you how to do it another time so you can paint cheaper this way. The primer or surfacer function is to make stronger bond between paint and plastic, to give color more easily at the coloring stage and also as an error check. The main paint of course has an obvious function, while top coat serves to make your paint more tightly bound to the plastic while protecting it from scratches, as well as giving you the choice of what kind of finish you want. It can be gloss or matte. For the primer itself, which I usually use, there are 3 colors: white, gray, and black. Remember that even they have same color, primer have different properties from paint of the same color. Primer have their own characteristic. I usually use white primer to paint light or pastel colors, because a white base color will give a light result. I use gray primer for standard coloring, and black primer I use for metallic coloring because metallic needs a gloss black base color for maximum result. So I don't need many coat of black paint if I use black primer. After you find the right distance, trigger pull and paint ratio, the first step is to spray primer on the surface part. Spray with a thin layer and even distribution. Don't just do a thick layer at a point. If you are going to give the same color to the original part, just do a thin layer. But if you are going to give a different color, spray on several layers until the original color is completely covered. As I said earlier, the primer also functions as an error check. After the primer is sprayed, you will see how bad your parts are. From the small dust and the rough result of the sandpaper will be seen. Fix it first, then repeat primer step until you get perfect result. After the primer stage, wait for the primer layer to dry, then continue with the coloring stage. The steps are still the same as primer. Give it a thin and even layer first. Repeat until the desired color is produced. For the spray pattern, never stop at one point. Change the direction of the spray when the paint has passed the part. This method applies to all stages. If the desired color has been obtained, wait for it to dry and continue to the next stage, which is apply top coat layer. For the first step is a little different. Spray very lightly and evenly and wait to dry first. Top coat has harsh properties compared than other paints. So this thin layer works so that the paint underneath is ready to accept a thicker layer of top coat. If you immediately spray with a thick layer, dried paint on the under layer may melt again and the result will be ugly, just like you. After the first thin coat is dry, you can spray on a layer of top coat until it looks wet. But please remember, do not too thick. Wait for each new layer to dry before spray another layer for maximum result. No need to wait for it to fully cure. Just wait until it's safe enough to touch for about 30 minutes for each layer. My tip: on the last layer, dilute your top coat. This will give better and smoother result. Wait for it to dry and cure completely. Please remember, the safe time it takes for it to dry completely is around 24 hours, depending on the type of paint. And this is the end result. Remove the remaining paint in the paintbrush cup. Pour the thinner according to the type of paint. Close the nozzle, press and pull the trigger. Remove the thinner and spray it out. Clean the cup from the remaining color. Refill it again with thinner. Try to see if there is still any remaining color coming out of the airbrush. If there is still, repeat the steps from the beginning. There are also some things that you should pay attention to. First, you may need a water thread. I attach this tool between the hose and the paintbrush. If your compressor is hot, water may form in your hoses. Do not let this water spray the part you are painting. To remove any collected water, simply press this button while the compressor is running. Second, humidity are the main enemies in getting maximum paint result. So my advice is to use a heat lamp near your part so that the surrounding air is not humid during the drying process. And the last one, of course, pay attention to your safety. There may be a safer use of acrylic paint, but there's nothing wrong with using a mask. Don't forget to pay attention to the air circulation where you paint. Easy, right? After you watch this video, please try it by yourself. Because no matter how much knowledge you have, no matter expensive tools you have, if you never try, everything will be useless. Goodbye, and we will meet again in my next video. Alice greeting.